shout out to Steven and Osbers Gaming for supporting me at level 3 or higher on Patreon. Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. Nintendo has finally spoken up about their next home console on Twitter. After many weeks, months and even years of speculation, it is finally official that Nintendo is working on a successor to the Switch, and it will be getting an announcement this fiscal year, which by the way ends March 31st next year. Ever since the end of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe booster course passed, as well as the decline in new game announcements, this has been the news that I've been craving the most to learn more about. It's already been like 9 years since the first Nintendo Switch was confirmed, and a little over 7 years since it was released, and honestly, it's still hard to believe that so much time has already passed. I still remember when I first got my Switch for the holidays in 2017, and it was unlike anything else I had seen before. And I, like many other people, asked myself, how could this even be improved? It already seemed perfect, combining a home console with a handheld system all in one. But now it's time for the next generation. So today I wanted to do a prediction video about Nintendo's next home console, when it releases, what features it will have, as well as games I think we could be getting for it, based on what we might know of leaks, as well as my own theories. So yeah, with all that being said, I say, let's get started. First, let's talk about everything related to its schedule, reveal date, release date, as well as for how long Nintendo might support the console. First off, it's important to remember that the Switch 2 wasn't the only new thing announced in this tweet. The president also mentioned a Nintendo Direct scheduled for June, which will go over upcoming Switch games for the second half of the year. Alas, there won't be a Switch 2 reveal for it. But I think it's safe to say that it's probably gonna be the last real Direct we'll have for Switch games. Because if the next console is to be announced within this year, it would be pretty unwise to continue focusing on an older console, since when the Switch 2 finally gets unveiled, people are likely gonna be saving money for that instead and games for that system. So this Direct probably won't be too massive. Off the top of my head, the only announcements I can really see coming from this are a new Mario Party game, a couple of Nintendo Switch Online games, and maybe something more. It's been 3 years since the last Mario Party game after all, and ever since ND Cube took over development of the franchise, there's been one new console game in the series every 3 years. So I think it could be a satisfying final Mario game on the Switch. At least more so than Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, which is just a remaster of a recent 3DS game. But yeah, so the Switch 2 probably won't be revealed as soon as many of us initially thought. Instead, I believe that we'll first be seeing a teaser at the end of summer this year, around late August perhaps. Sure, not all Switch games will have been released yet, but I think it would give enough time for people to breathe after the June Direct. And hey, it's still just a teaser, so it would still be a while until it releases. It would get a little crazier in late October, because shortly after my speculated next Mario Party game releases, I believe that we could be getting a Nintendo Direct dedicated to the Switch 2. It wouldn't be anything too long, but it would basically give you a rundown of how the system works, as well as a couple of major titles coming out for it soon. We've seen Nintendo in the past dedicate Directs to separate games as well, depending on how much there is to announce, and while I don't think we've had something like this for a console previously, I think it's at least moderately likely, assuming we don't get a September Direct like normally. Which I don't think we will, because, let's be fair, I have a hard time seeing new Switch titles get announced at this point. And lastly, I believe the release date for this thing is likely gonna land somewhere early next year. There's a ton of different leaks on whether we'll get it for the holidays this year, or if it's a little delayed, but it's always best to assume the worst, and I believe that February 2025 would give them enough time to sprinkle it up. Plus, it would be around the same time as the original Switch released. I'm just not sure how they'd be able to release it this year. If they already planned for more Switch games until the holidays now anyways, then I think it's a sign that the next console needed more work before it released to the market. But yeah, assuming that's when it releases, and taking into consideration how long until the next console releases, I think it could be Nintendo's ship to sail until at least 2032. Wow, that feels so far into the future. But that's about it for this category. On to the next one. Secondly, let's talk about the somewhat more central aspect, the features. Obviously, the Switch 2 is gonna have to stand out from its predecessor. And that raises the question, how can you make something better than the Switch? Besides improved power, of course. The Nintendo Switch is already revolutionary as it is, being a hybrid console and all. It's a system that you can both play on the TV, as well as take with you wherever you like, with even detachable controllers. How do you possibly follow up on this? Well, I have a bit of an idea. Last year, in October, Nintendo filed a patent for a dual-screen gaming device, like the Nintendo DS, and assuming that it's for their next console, I think it could end up being really interesting actually. The way I envision it is this. Imagine you had a normal Nintendo Switch. Nothing unusual at first. Except wait, there's actually a second screen that you can attach to the system. That way, you could use it like a Nintendo DS, with a regular top screen as well as a bottom touch screen. But then, when you want to play on a TV, you'll just attach the top screen and put it in a dock, while the bottom screen, with its Joy-Cons or whatever, remains a controller. So, a bit like a Wii U that way. Although, I hope there would also be a setting that allows both screens to be visible on the TV. For example, the Wii U itself had Virtual Console DS games, and those allowed you to switch between a multitude of screen perspectives, depending on your preference. So you could see both the top and bottom screen on your TV. And this could also make multiplayer quite interesting. Imagine if you wanted to play with someone else, but instead of just attaching the controllers, what if you could also both use one screen each? This could definitely work. But yeah, that's about it for the basic features. But obviously, there's more potential to it than that. With a dual screen system, we could potentially see retro DS and 3DS games again. And not just for remakes, but also for online services. The Nintendo Switch, for example, gave you an entire catalog of retro games from the NES, SNES and N64 era, and it was cool. Granted, it was locked behind a paywall, but since it also included online play, for total less than $50 per year, I'd say it was pretty generous. Especially now that there's dozens upon dozens of games. And assuming that the Switch 2 has the same online service as the original Switch, which I think it will, maybe we could see DS and 3DS services. After all, they're both well over 10 years old now, so maybe it's about time. DS games could come with the regular subscription, while 3DS games would come with the expansion pass. Or maybe both are locked behind the expansion pass. They have a lot of good games after all. And those are all of the major features I'll be predicting. However, there's a few other minor quirks I think the Switch 2 will also have. Most noticeably, backwards compatibility. In general, Nintendo has been pretty consistent with this feature for their consoles. The GameCube and DS were backwards compatible with the GBA, the Wii was compatible with the GameCube, the 3DS with DS, and the Wii U was basically just an upgraded Wii. Granted, the Switch wasn't backwards compatible, but it was also supposed to be a kind of rebirth, as opposed to the Switch 2, which is more likely than not to be a spiritual successor to the Switch. Another thing that hopefully stays with us are the Miis. Over time, these avatars have slowly faded into obscurity as time goes on, from initially having their own applications in games, to now being relegated to a dark corner in the system settings on the Switch. But they still have their place in games such as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Miitopia, and considering how iconic they are, I don't think they'll be discontinued just yet. But yeah, that's about it for feature predictions I think. Now, onto the final category. The games. In the end, probably the most important feature of a console. Without any games, there's no point to having a console. Except for the 3DS, which have base raiders. But yeah, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Every console needs good games to get people to buy it. Now, what is considered good is of course highly subjective and varies from person to person. But that doesn't mean that there's not at least a couple of games that would take people by storm, so I'm just gonna brainstorm for a select few game ideas that I think we could see. First, I believe that the launch title for this system is gonna be Metroid Prime 4. Where have you been? This game was first announced for the E3 Direct of 2017, and there has since been no update at all on its current status. Some rumors speculate that it's close to completion, others say it's been scrapped, but I certainly don't think we'll be seeing it for the Switch. But maybe we'll see it for the next console. I personally believe that the reason we haven't seen anything of it yet is because while developing it, they realized it was maybe a bit too powerful for the Switch to handle, and it ended up causing huge frame drops perhaps, so instead they're waiting for the next generation console, where it can be experienced in its full glory. So maybe it's basically already finished and we just gotta wait. A new Mario baseball game could possibly entice us for the summer season next year. It's been rumored since at least February last year that Nintendo was working on a new Mario sports game, so we're likely to see it sooner than later. In fact, maybe it's just gonna be a game for the regular Switch. I wouldn't be surprised if it got announced next Direct already, but I believe that it could possibly be our first Mario spin-off for the next system. I wouldn't keep my hopes too high up, knowing Nintendo's record for previous Mario sports games, but who knows. As long as it gets a Europe release, at least that's something. Why did we never get Mario Super Sluggers here? For the holidays next year, I think it's also about time that we get a new 3D Mario adventure. Whatever this would be, would no doubt end up being a bestseller for the system, especially since it's been a while. The last 3D Mario campaign was Bowser's Fury back in 2021, and even then, it wasn't really a full-fledged game, more like a tech demo of what the next 3D Mario could be like. If we don't count that, 2017 was the last time we had one, with Super Mario Odyssey. And that's as long as the Switch has been going on for. Luckily, a new 3D Mario adventure does appear to be in development. And if anything, I suspect it's gonna be very similar in style to Bowser's Fury, in that you have one huge world to explore, divided up into different areas. I certainly wouldn't mind that. Bowser's Fury was already one of my favorite 3D Mario adventures, despite its smaller size. And frankly, the only problem I had with it is that I wish it had more. And thankfully, maybe that complaint will soon be answered. Maybe a new 3D Mario could even have Metroidvania elements, where you started off weak, but the more you played and explored, the more abilities you'd learn, allowing you access to new areas. Or maybe that would be a bit too niche, but hey, I think it could be cool. A new F-Zero game is well overdue, and while we haven't had a new installment in this series since the GameCube days, I think it's more likely for this franchise to get a revival now than say 10 years ago, especially with F-Zero 99 having been made for the Switch last year. I see that as an experiment on Nintendo's part, to see if people like the series enough for a new game to be beneficial. And hey, I certainly haven't seen much less than love for it, so maybe we're in luck. Another game series that is well overdue is Donkey Kong Country. These games have always been the pinnacle of 2D platforming for me. While Mario is what I've mostly grown up with, Donkey Kong Country always stood out more for its more unique level design, bosses, and harder difficulty. Sadly, it hasn't seen a new installment since Tropical Freeze on the Wii U, and that's sad because, excluding returns, all these games are tremendously creative for me. Luckily, a new Donkey Kong game does seem to be in development, but we haven't heard anything else since. And who can forget Mario Kart X, the next mainline Mario Kart game? Mario Kart is one of the best-selling Nintendo franchises of all time, so obviously we'd be getting a game for it sooner or later on the system. On one hand, it's definitely gonna be hard to top Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is now the game with the most courses, characters, and just about everything. But I'm sure there's still a few ways that Mario Kart can be improved. Maybe bring back mission mode. Or better yet, maybe we can get a story mode. According to leaks, it does seem to have the biggest budget of any Mario Kart game though, so perhaps that's a good sign. And how about another remake of an ancient Mario classic? Recently, Nintendo has been surprisingly focused on remaking older Mario games. In just the past year, we had new versions of Super Mario RPG, Mario vs Donkey Kong, as well as Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door coming in a few weeks. So I think we'll see a somewhat similar trend continue for the Switch too. And in my opinion, by far the likeliest next remake has got to be for Mario and Luigi Partners in Time. The tragedy of the Mario and Luigi series is a sad one. Probably the most consistent Mario RPG series, with no actual bad games. Alas, Alpha Dream, the company that made them, filed for bankruptcy, following the flopping of the worst-selling Mario game in history. But that doesn't mean it has to be the end of the franchise as a whole. The Super Mario RPG remake, for example, was developed by a completely different team, Art Piazza, compared to the original, which was made by Square Enix. So perhaps Mario and Luigi could be given over to a new developer as well. And assuming that the Switch 2 is a dual-screen system, what better console is there otherwise to remake a game originally made for the DS? And lastly, what if we could finally get a sequel to Tomodachi Life? Now this one probably isn't as likely as the other ones I talked about here, but I also just felt that I had to shine some light on this little gem, because this might possibly be one of my favorite Nintendo games ever made. And if you played it, you know why. It's just such a charming little title, where you create your own island and then invite over your Mii characters to live on it. It's a crime that we haven't seen a successor to it, and depending on if Miis are still relevant in the next console, the likelihood for a successor might sadly decrease, but I'm hoping for the best. But overall, those are the likeliest games that I think we could be seeing for the Switch too. Obviously, there's a whole other array of games that I'd also like to see though. A new Wario Land game is overdue, a 2D open world Mario game would be nice, like Super Mario 63, and there will likely be another Mario Party in 2027, assuming the 3-year pattern continues. And obviously, we're gonna have an influx of new Pokemon games. But those are stories for another video. These are simply the games that I'm most certain will appear in the next few years. And with that, that concludes my first predictions for Nintendo's next home console, whatever the name for it will be. I mean, I'd personally settle for something like the Dual Switch or maybe Flip Switch, but knowing Nintendo, it's gonna be the Nintendo Switch Attach. At least if I am to believe the YouTube survey poll, which unfortunately I do. But yeah, let me know what you think of my predictions down below. Am I too optimistic, or am I too generous maybe? Either is possible. And make sure to also let me know what your predictions are. I'm sure you have some great ideas as well. In the meantime, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. Follow me on Discord, Twitter, and Patreon for more updates as well. And with all that being said, I'm signing off until next time.